You are listening to the Dilettantes Podcast.
Bob Dylan rang in 2023 with the release of his 17th entry into the bootleg series, the much-anticipated Fragments, consisting of demos, alternate versions, live versions, and outtakes from the Time Out of Mind sessions in 1996 and 97. The deluxe set consists of 5 discs, the last of which features material from Telltale Signs, Bootleg Series 8. The first disc is a cleaned-up version of the original release with some production elements removed. Disc 2 and 3 consist of outtakes and alternates unreleased before, and Disc 4 is live versions of the songs. Only one song from Time Out of Mind, by the way, Dirt Road Blues, has never been performed live, and some, notably Lovesick, have been crowd favorites. So here at $1 Million Bash Wing of the Dilettantes, we have rounded up the usual suspects to round out our roundtable. Rob Reginio teaches modern literature at Alfred University. He is currently at work on a book about Dylan's album, John Wesley Harding. Nina Goss is editor of or contributor to the volumes Tearing the World Apart, Bob Dylan in the 21st Century, and Dylan a Play. She is a contributor to various anthologies and presented at the first World of Bob Dylan Conference 2019 and Dylan and the Beats Conference in Tulsa 2022. She teaches at Fordham University. Court Carney is a professor of history at Stephen F. Austin State University, where he teaches courses on Black history and cultural history. He is finishing a book manuscript on the public memory of Nathan Bedford Forrest. Erin Callahan lives in Houston, Texas area, where she teaches English at San Jacinto College. Graley Hearn is an English professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati, where he regularly teaches a first-year seminar on Bob Dylan. He is author of the book Dreams and Dialogues in Dylan's Time Out of Mind, and he has a Substack newsletter devoted to Dylan called Shadow Chasing. And I am Jim Salvucci, founder and keeper of the Dilettantes. And by the way, all of us will be speaking at the World of Bob Dylan Conference in Tulsa this spring, so you can see us there. Let's get your impressions. Now, I don't want your first takes or your impressions from January, but tell me what you think of Fragments now.
Well, I'm impressed. I mean, obviously, I love Time Out of Mind, and I love that we now have all these outtakes and alternate takes. I'm impressed by the experimental approach of Bob Dylan, that he can just radically take a completely different approach to a song, that he has that kind of confidence and that kind of innovation. I'm impressed by the quality of these songs even more because they're versatile enough to accommodate different musical approaches. And we often talk about that, I mean, to use the fancy word for it, bricolage technique, right, of Dylan, which he really started to perfect with Time Out of Mind, taking shards and fragments of other works and piecing them together in interesting ways for his songs. But now that we have Fragments, we can see he's not just doing that with other people's music, he's doing it with his own, that he will take little lines and sometimes entire verses from one song and move it over into another one. And so it's really cool to see his creative process on display in Fragments.
Fragments really reframed Time Out of Mind for me and really brought to the fore for me what a polished and homogenized piece of work Time Out of Mind is. And there's a vitality and a roughness to the outtakes to the work on Fragments. There's some that, in a strange way, Fragments is not timeless in the way that the finished product, the sound, the persona of Time Out of Mind is. So it really seems to me to be very contrasting worlds, very contrasting aesthetic and moral and personal worlds, the two sets of music. And I'm afraid that Time Out of Mind is going to seem too professional and polished for me going forward as a result of this.
My respect for the finished product of Time Out of Mind has been heightened by this. Not to say that the Fragments outtakes are not intriguing. I'm besotted by the Dirt Road Blues, rhythmic Dirt Road, that version. But I think one of the things that this allowed me to think about is the way in which the album is typically framed as like this meditation on death and meditation on love lost. And I'm going to embarrass Grayley by quoting from his book. I couldn't help it. I was rereading it, where he writes that Time Out of Mind emerged out of Dylan's heightened sensitivity to and his increased personal stakes in the intertwined history of American music, as found in the blues. And so love and theft becomes a key theme. And I think that's really, for me, really nails down what this listening experience has been to me. I would go so far as to say that the fixation on mortality and the blues on Time Out of Mind is an extended thinking through of his sources, that he's sifting through the songs that influenced him, looking for new inspiration. He's processing how cultural fixities become unfixed, how truths become illusory, and yet memory, both of resilience and of sorrow, remain in the songs. And so I think what I hear is this clutch of songs that are put on the hook of love songs in general, but that kind of fades away as the process of recording goes on, and lyrically and sonically, these weightier themes about the passage of historical and cultural time become the dominant theme. And so that's why I had have a heightened respect for the depth of going on in that final in the released version.
I agree with that, Rob. I think for me it was the process and like listening to the versions, and I think we all put together our own playlist and kind of altered how we listened to them. And I went through all the different versions of the songs, and the arrangements, both lyrically and sonically, to me did heighten my appreciation for the finished product. And then, so I think that it was looking at the process of him as, I think, Nina, you said he's thinking out loud, and to actually see him go through the process of thinking out loud and kind of pull things apart and come up with that finished product was really wonderful for me.
I think that I came to it thinking about it as a bootleg series volume. And I think I was probably not underwhelmed, but I was maybe whelmed at first. And I think my problem was, I think I kept on saying, well, why is the telltale sign stuff there? And then I kind of came to the realization that the question is actually, why does telltale signs exist? I think that's kind of more where I'm coming from. So my first thought was like, well, what is this? And then the more I've listened to it, the more I've let it just run. It really has a coherence, and not the record itself, which has its own coherence, but this bootleg series actually is kind of, I think it does help. I think as Nina and others have said, it kind of helps recontextualize a little bit what's going on. I'll also add that what's interesting is not so much the works in progress, which I like, but also there's this other stream that he seems to be playing with that doesn't get on the record, and it doesn't get on Love and Theft either. And it's sort of that World Gone Wrong sort of, and we can talk about this later, but this kind of other, and it's not an alternative lane, and it's not something that kind of dies off. It kind of continues to exist, but it's existing outside of his records. It's kind of, there's something there I think that's interesting, where he's kind of going back, and I'll say that the magic words for me are Red River Shore and stuff like that. There's something really sort of interesting there, that he's not either able to get to the level he wants on record, or they don't fit the records, or whatever it is, but there's something that's kind of external to this record that I didn't quite get before that I really love.
That's a big topic, Court. I'm wondering if that might be future topic for one of these roundtables. What has been left off and why. And I know a lot of people have covered that ground, but I don't think it's been covered well. And I think the Brain Trust here would do a really great job with that. Grayley, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. You wrote the book, Dreams and Dialogues and Dylan's Time Out of Mind. It's a book, I think, as time goes on, it's going to get more and more difficult to talk about Time Out of Mind and, frankly, Fragments without referencing your book in some way or another. And, so congratulations on that. Do we need an appendix? Do we need an addendum? Do we need a supplement to your book since the release of Fragments? And I opened this up to everyone, but I want Grayley to talk first.
Well, it's deepened my appreciation of Time Out of Mind. You, as an author who is on the record in such detail about an album, There was some trepidation here. Is he going to pull the rug out from under all of my arguments and reveal to me how wrong I had it? I did not feel that way with Fragments. In each case, as much as I love Fragments, I could see why certain takes didn't make it onto the album, and it did reaffirm my belief that he released the right album. He and Lanois put together the songs and the versions of songs that fit together most coherently to create this kind of sonic atmosphere. And thematically, the Fragments were revealing in that you can see him in the workshop, working with these ideas, sometimes more blatantly in the outtakes. Dreamin' of You Always is fascinating to me. My single favorite track on the whole Fragments is that Teatro version of Dreamin' of You, which I just think is fantastic. And you realize in listening to Teatro that Dylan could have given us a very different record. I would never wish that Time Out of Mind as released were anything other than it is, but I would have loved to seen him keep going in that direction and given us an album's worth of that stuff too, because between the Can't Wait on Telltale Signs and this Dreamin' of You, and isn't there a Dirt Road Blues from Teatro, or am I thinking of Till I Fell in Love with You? Everything from those Oxnard sessions I just love, as different as they are from the released album. But in thinking of in terms of the newly released material and my book, I especially was intrigued by the religious outtakes. I mean, certain references to faith and the master and guide or God, depending on how you read it, and it could almost work either way. And then I think that the either shakiest limb that I walk onto in the book, or the most interesting, I prefer the latter. The possibility of a meditation on race in the songs, and that sense of possibly on one level a kind of fugitive slave narrative, or an historical allegory of the search, not for an actual physical lost lover, but for liberty, for freedom. Those ideas were really reinforced for me, especially on the one I'm going to read, right? I mean, that great line from Standing in the Doorway version 1 that I wish had made it onto the album, but I'm glad that we now have access to it. When the last rays of daylight go down, buddy, you'll roll no more. I can hear them silent bells in my head, and I wonder who they're ringing for. Don't pass me by, give me liberty, or let me die. I think there's so much you can do with that, and it's so much more ambitious than just a lost love song, someone pining away for the woman who got away. I mean, it is that. It would be futile to deny that it works on that first level. But there are other levels of meaning he's working on here, and lines like that, I think, really reinforce the idea. Much like he uses Rosie, I think, as more than just a person, but as some emblematic dream of liberty and freedom, of an embodiment, an allegorical embodiment of those ideas. I see a lot of that on display here. And I love the fact it feels to me now that, yes, Mississippi is a great song. Yes, Mississippi fits well on Love and Theft, but Mississippi is a Time Out of Mind song. And I feel like that position is just even more solidified now that we have so many outtakes, and that they're always framed in connection through the bootleg series with this album, because that song speaks volumes to that theme of the meditation on race in America, in Dylan's work in general, but especially on the South.
All right, I want to open it up. Any others?
I just want to throw into Grayley real quick that I can't point to the letter and verse here, but I would also throw in, I'll say it again, Red River Shore, that there is an undercurrent there, especially if you connect Red River Shore to something like Lakes of Pontchartrain, which I think is clear. And then you have kind of races right to the edge, like it's here. And maybe not so to the edge, maybe it's central too. I think there's a lot that you could do with that. I think putting that into your conversation would be interesting.
And there's a Red River Blues by Josh White, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, that fits in. But what Grayley said about that line, it's just such a brilliant reinterpretation of a cliche. Give me liberty or let me die. I mean, when you were speaking that, Grayley, I couldn't agree more. I think that, in fact, the what we get in Fragments bolsters the case that this is and that's kind of how I began with my impressions was maybe I'm too influenced by your book, but I definitely see that, you hear in the press the continual litany of Dylan facing his own mortality, Dylan thinking about lost love, but standing in the doorway, he makes it by taking those lines out of it into a love song. But now we get to see that he was thinking about these larger themes, and that standing in the doorway with that line in it, I don't know if it might have fit on. I mean, it reaffirms what you said.
Well, Rob, I also wanted to bring in like the question of, does it change the way we look at this, right? And I think if those sessions, if you listen to like what you're doing, if you're looking at John Wesley Harding, if you heard all the outtakes, it doesn't really change. I mean, there are some really interesting things, but it doesn't really change the record so much. But this is a record where these outtakes really do offer, very interesting. I mean, Can't Wait. I mean, there's all sorts of different threads that could have been there. I mean, I still love the record, the one that's on the record, but there's some great lyrics that just get tossed.
Yeah.
So I think this unlike other records, these are the outtakes that kind of do shape like a shadow version of the record that could be.
Absolutely. And in curating my own version of Time Out of Mind based on these outtakes, I deferred often to the studio, the final but I couldn't decide which Can't Wait I wanted to put on there, because they're all so wonderful. Yeah. And so evocative of different paths that could have been taken.
I want to move on to a different topic. One that is always lurking there because it's just been there since the beginning. And that is Daniel Lanois, the producer of Time Out of Mind. The number one dig against Time Out of Mind has been, since the beginning, his production values and what he imposed. Now we have a version of the album, the volume or the first disc of volume 17 of the bootleg series, that is stripping out much of what he did. And so you can hear Time Out of Mind without all that so-called swampiness. What are your thoughts on his influence at this point?
Well, since I love Time Out of Mind as it is, I didn't need a remix. So I feel like if you needed an alternate version of Time Out of Mind, you got it. And so the Columbia and the Dylan camp have placated that long complaint. And since we've heard Dylan himself make it too, it feels like an act of bad faith on his part to throw Lanois under the bus that way. I would be supremely insulted if I were Daniel Lanois, but I've listened to the remix. I have nothing against the remix for the person who did it. He was doing a job that he was contracted to do. I'm not quite sure why Columbia or Bob Dylan would do that, but so be it. I've listened to it once. I doubt I'll be listening to it again. I'll take Time Out of Mind as released. So I guess I'm not the right person to be answering this question, since I was fun. And I think that the more, for instance, that Craig Danieloff has done those important interviews with Mark Howard, people involved with the making of the record, we realized that the dirty sound was coming from Dylan. I mean, that I think one thing that at least around the 25th anniversary, the more we've heard from people involved that we realized we got wrong initially was that the sound was somehow against Bob Dylan's wishes, or a desecration of his pure sound. And the person in the studio who wanted to make it dirtier was Bob Dylan, not Daniel Lanois. Lanois wanted to do the teatro stuff. That was what Lanois wanted for this album. It was Dylan who pushed it in a different direction.
Grayley, you're in supportive company, though, because Court and I talked about this, and we didn't feel as Court says, overwhelmed by the remix. That, I like the Lanois production because I think that it gives us, I feel like Dylan is sort of in that space where he's constantly moving and he's not one place or another place. And so sort of that meta space that the sound sonically, the Lanois production gives us that. And so I prefer the Lanois production for that reason, that we feel that we're sort of in an in-between space maybe with Dylan as he's trying to, find his way.
I agree totally that Lanois just is able to create this sonic space that's completely suspended, and that if Time Out of Mind is supposed to make us feel actual palpable timelessness suspended between life and death and the underworld and the material world, if we're really supposed to feel that, then the Lanois production makes that absolutely palpable. And I'm with Grayley. I listened to the remix once and I just go right past that to the outtakes every time I listen to this. So I'm thumbs up Lanois.
It's so interesting because what would we want the remixes of? We want the remixes of those 80s records, right? We want the remixes.
Yeah, we want Empire Burlesque stripped down to
but they're making it
underwear.
This was a little bit of the critics, but it was a little bit too of like this is like Let It Be Naked or something. Like we're taking Spectre out of it. And Spectre away from Let It Be kind of proves that Spectre needed to be on some of that stuff. But I think this is such a strange thing. I will also add that this was the first record, kind of like the liner notes, this is the first record I bought as a contemporary Dylan fan. This was the first one. And it was like, I came from a world where Emmylou Harris, Wrecking Ball, U2, Lanois was a norm. And when you heard that, it wasn't weird. I mean, it wasn't strange, and I think people were kind of off-put by it. But there was a contingent of people that had been written out that didn't find that shocking or odd at all. The other thing I'll say is that this record was my COVID record, and during COVID, I went back to this record a lot, and I was struck by how fucking good a record it is. That everything works in it, and that. You want to say, well, is it really about mortality? It can't really. Is it really? Are we just believing that? Then you go back to it and you're like, oh, yeah, no, it really is. Now, it's not about his personal necessarily mortality, but it's all there. And the other thing I'll say is that I was really struck by, and I've been struck by with Fragments too, is going back to, we can talk about mortality, we can talk about death, and we can talk about all of this, but you also have those two last verses of Highland, which are some of the most beautiful writing he has, where it's like, here's the sun, but it's a different sun. And here I am, but I have different eyes. And he has that whole last bit where it's like, the whole record ends with, that's good enough for now. That's pretty amazing. And I know Highlands is kind of a weird song in some ways. We want to say it's not really but it is. And to have that whole story song at the end, I just remember going back to that song over and over again going, well, I don't think I've really listened to it that often. But I was like, man, when he goes from the waitress and the eggs and the sort of comical thing into this like meditative space at the end, I mean, that's it. And like what Nina was saying, there's like a meditative thing going on there. And I think that it nails it. I think it's great. And that's not just because I'm championing what's ever there, but the alternate versions don't woo me, I should say.
Yeah. I agree with you about Highlands for sure. Highlands is kind of like Desolation Row in a way, where it pins together, it holds all the songs together. It enfolds the whole song sequence in this persona that's considering his own art, the passage of time, the way that we dream through these songs and cross borders between selves and eras and between life and death. And I love that. And that's the line. I love that line too. I've got new eyes. Everything seems farther away. Right. Which is that distance of I don't quite fit in, but also the past is somehow there lingering on the horizon. I like the Lanois production. And I mean, I went back and reread his great praise for Lanois on the Oh Mercy record in Chronicles, where he says, Danny's sonic atmosphere, this is on What Is It You Wanted? Danny's sonic atmosphere makes it sound like it's coming out of some mysterious silent land. The production gyrates and moves with all kinds of layered rhythms. There's a certain romance of sound that Lanois has in his head. And there's that ex post facto, Lanois threw all these polyrhythms on my record. And here he is in Chronicles saying, I like the layered rhythms. It creates this, what is reverb, but a way of manipulating or working with echo. And that works on a thematic level with this album. It works sonically, and as everyone has articulated so well, it puts us in this really beautiful liminal space.
One of the things that stood out to me in listening to Fragments, and it's not that it wasn't there before, I just didn't notice it as much as I did this time for whatever reason. And there were certain lines, I think, that were left off the album that accentuated it. But it's just how important this imagery of blindness is.
Eyes like pieces of broken glass. That is just deathless.
Oh,
that's just
line
deathless.
After line.
Yeah.
And we already know from Blind Willie McTell and from the kinds of songs that Dylan covered on Good As I've Been to You and World Gone Wrong, how much he admires and emulates those blind blues masters. And I make the argument in a piece for Shadow Chasing that maybe he's trying to kind of imagine his way into that experience and write songs as if he were a blind blues master. But then the thing that was suddenly striking me that I hadn't thought of before until Court was talking is that imagery of the sun, but it's not the sun that was before, and that I've got new eyes, everything seems far away. If you have new eyes, you'd think it would bring things closer, but instead it makes it harder to see. And that sun then could be a kind of, it's easy to think of the sun as a kind of eye of God, right? And if it's a blind eye, that's such a powerful image, right? This sort of sense of the dark land of the sun. Wait, the sun, that shouldn't be a dark land, that should be a light land. But even on a metaphysical level, there's a sense of blindness in the pall of this dark world he's creating for us. And that Lanois is supplementing, complementing sonically.
Well, that outtake of Can't Wait, where you're turning yourself to the wall and the sun is so intense. Some of that stuff gets into the release take, but there's all sorts of stuff there that he is playing with. I think he even says blindness in that take too.
Does anybody remember when he introduced the Eye of Horus as his sort of unofficial symbol?
I looked that up once. I don't remember. Yeah.
I'm thinking in early 2000s, mid 2000s, somewhere in there. But not long after this album. But that's interesting.
I almost got a tattoo of that. Cut that part out of this whole Zoom.
I'm only going to cut it out if you got a tattoo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Can't Wait version 1. Well, the blindness overtaking me is beating like a drum.
Yeah. There's no bad take of Can't Wait. Every single version of Can't Wait is the best version of Can't Wait. Every single one is the best. Whichever I'm listening to, that's the best one.
I couldn't choose.
Let's do it in B flat.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the trick, and that's where he gets these songs. Like you go back to Blood on the Tracks, there's that ability where he could keep riffing these lyrics forever, and they'd always be there, but then they're a little bit different. And then he does it with Can't Wait. These are different songs, but it's the same song.
Can I just say one thing, and then I have to go? This is tying into what Grayley was saying, is that the whole, when you take the Trying to Get to Heaven, is it Trying to Get to Heaven 2? Yes. Trying to Get to Heaven, which is almost identical lyrically and phrase-wise to the Lanois, to the album version. It's almost identical, but that subtle difference of that space that Lanois creates on the album really is the right choice. There's incredible vocals. There's incredible vocal subtlety. My favorite verse in that song, the pendulums, the people on the station, he just really infuses that with this energy on the outtake, but that just would not have been right for the album. So even those songs where it's not it's nothing like the Not Dark Yet, where it's a whole other universe of but where the changes are where it's just the subtleness of the production, he really did the right thing for the album. And that's it. I got to go. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nina.
Bye, Nina.
Bye.
I'm actually sorry we're losing Nina at that exact moment, because the next question I was hoping she would be here for.
Go back to that tattoo. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. And it's about the live disc 4, the live version of the album. Were there any standouts for you, disappointments, anything missing? I mean, what are your thoughts about those live versions?
I was not signing up for this to go, I need a Till I Fell in Love with You live version, but that recording is fireworks.
Yeah.
Like if we had an entire, I don't know, y'all might have dug into that bootleg or whatever, but if there's an entire concert with that quality of vocal, man.
I've been digging into a lot of bootlegs from the era because, and part of, and I found some real gems. So it doesn't, some of the recordings are clearly, some of them are audience recordings. They're not soundboard recordings. I'm actually a fan of, or I guess this is presaging your question about what should we have next on the bootleg series. I would like to hear some of those soundboard, especially the prime years of like 97 through 2002 would be a great a deep dive into the Never Ending Tour. But I wasn't the Till I Fell in Love with You is the standout. I agree with Court in that regard. The rest of them, I've heard so many bootleg versions. One thing I do want to say though is that that the fidelity somewhat to the final version of the album version of the songs shows to me that Dylan was really proud of the album that he and Lenoir put together. That a lot of the songs live are the arrangements. It's not true for Trying to Get to Heaven. He's got a much more meditative, slower version, but most of them, Lovesick, even Can't Wait, they tend to follow the arrangements that they settled on as the final product. And so that shows that Dylan was really proud of that, of the record that he and Lenoir collaborated on.
If you're going to sing the 20 verse, if you're going to have a 20 verse song and you're going to sing it live, why don't just sing the 20 verse song? Why mash it into a 19 verse song? Because he collapses I think verse 2 and 3. That's kind of that's an interesting mindset. Like, what is there something there? Is he construct? I mean, it doesn't become a short song. I love that anecdote where he says, "This is the short version." I love that. There's a question here, not from live, but it dawned on me, and I'll pause it. Maybe Grayley, you can answer this too. But going back to the original conversation, does this record even seem like a 1997 record? I mean, I think that's what's so interesting about it. We look at it now, and the pull quote, of course, is this was old Dylan, and now that was halfway Dylan. But like 1997, I was trying to think. You have the Stones doing Bridges to Babylon, and that's all we'll say. But McCartney is doing Flaming Pie. And he goes through the whole anthology, and he goes back and he says, here's a new way of recording. There's not a direct analog there, but if you're looking at what Dylan's coming from, there's a lot of he's so different. Like that record is so different. He's not going on some journey to the past. He's in the journey of the present, right? He's trying to figure this out. But it's so fascinating when we think about that. And the other thing I'll add is that there is a very good reason why Jerry Garcia's death predates this. I get that. But there's also, I've always been struck by the fact that he starts recording just a few weeks after Townes Van Zandt died. And the connection between Dylan and Van Zandt is not an easy one. And don't suggest that there is a direct connection here. But that was an interesting thing when you start looking at those notes and you start realizing the recording dates. And that's always fun with Dylan. You're going, well, what's going on here? What's going on there? But then the other thing, too, is this is a 1997 recording. And it comes out. You have OK Computer, right? I think is that same year. You also have the biggest selling record is Candle in the Wind. redo, right? That's what he's coming in from. I mean, that's what's being sung. And I think maybe that the record is stranger then than now. Maybe it's stranger now than then. I don't know what we do with it, but it's strange to consider it as a 1997 album, because Lanois makes that very, very difficult. Because Lanois makes it sound like a Lanois record. It's a 1990 Lanois record. It's not necessarily a 1997 record. But I think that is exactly the point that Grayley, you make. Again, it's in time, out of time. It's of the moment. It's of his moment. But yet it's also being put out there at a time when all these other records are sort of there. And you have his peers, quote unquote, are still putting out new product, but they're very different. They're very different takes on their careers and that. And I don't think Dylan's thinking in those terms at all, which is not news, but it's interesting. It's interesting when you go back to that moment.
Yeah, it is a time-shifting album, right? And you feel that sense of wrinkles in time where he'll mash together references that don't seem to fit together, except that Bob Dylan makes them fit together. You can have Standing in the Doorway that starts off with a jukebox, and then he's riding a horse. I love that line about the horse, right? And he'll seem to be making references, that it'll be a contemporary song, but then he'll be making these biblical references. And it's not a contradiction. It's not like he lost the thread. He forgot what he was writing about. This is how Dylan sees a world in which these overlapping time references make some kind of sense. And so sonically, yeah, it's on the one hand, the tapes that the music he wanted Lanois to listen to get ready for this album it might as well be a 1927 album as a 1997 album, Charlie Patton and stuff. But then we also learned, that he wanted it to be a Beck album or sound like that with loops and all this. And so it is a weird mishmash of things, and it shouldn't work, but it so does.
But it also, it's a beautiful prelude and obvious reasons to Love and Theft. But but like you brought up the bricolage element, and that the bricolage stuff was less talked about. It's what everyone talks about after Love and Theft. But before that, he's playing this really interesting piece here. And I like the idea that he's kind of taking himself as the subject. Like it's not another poet or something. He's obvious. And the thing is, and this is what's so beautifully evocative about this record from the very beginning, is that he's searching. We know this, never-ending tour, whatever you want to look at it, whatever metaphor or whatever way you want to get into it. But he's obviously going, this is not what I want. This is not the song the way I want it, and now it is. Or this is the song that's not quite what I want, and how it is. And you have these musicians who are like, well, this is the best thing I've ever heard in my life, I've ever been involved with. And it's like, yeah, we're not doing it. I understand the frustration, but it's such a beautiful kind of monument to this. And just the harp on it, when you have Red River sitting out there with these at least two gorgeous versions that are very different, they shouldn't be on the record. I'm not making the argument they should be on the record, but he's on this other path, because you have Red River Shore, you got Huck's Tune a little bit later. You have these really interesting sort of vibrations that are happening outside of this other thing. He doesn't ever makes a whole record that sounds like it, but if he did, some of those outtakes, his voice is so great and it's so beautiful, and so different sounding that there's like a whole other shadow series of records he could have made on.
But to both of your points, so Rob and I had talked about that yesterday, Thursday, about how the albums that he gives, or the people he tells Lanois to listen to, clearly he's not making a modern record, but then he has, he puts in their Odelay. And for me, I think it highlights this idea, because there's constant movement in Time Out of Mind. He's walking, he's on a boat, he's been all around the world, but he's constantly talking about how he's moving. And then I'll get to the points where he's standing still, because there is a point to be made there. But we go back to all the times that he said, an artist has to be careful never to really arrive at a place, where he thinks he's somewhere, and that constant movement is a state of constant artistic creation and its vitality. And so what we're seeing, even though he's contemplating mortality, it starts the next, what we thought was end career Dylan, but you pointed out it's mid-career Dylan, that it's the next part of his career, and he's created some really great stuff from that point, and he's already in the Never Ending Tour, so he is moving. But from that point on, he starts to really play the new stuff. And so that, to me, that movement that we see that I've really been focused on is artistic vitality. And it's also the sense of creation where we see him constantly moving and creating, new ways of writing and painting and, considering his artistic creation. And the places where we see him standing still, he really feels that sense of mortality. And he took out of, I know you were excited, Grayley, about that first version of Not Dark Yet that I was on first listen horrified by. Like horrified. And part of that is a personal, because this is the album I listened to over the last year, and especially in the fall. But he takes out the line where he's standing in the shadow watching the parade. And so, and even when, so he's taken that stasis out of that song. And then he also has it looks like I'm moving, but I'm standing still. And so that sort of sleight of hand that, he is standing still where he's feeling that the darkness is coming. And I found that just lovely. But that's how I look at this, is that, it is suspended in time, but he's also giving us this constant movement where he's launching something new. I have more to say about Not Dark Yet, but I will be quiet now because I think Rob wants to speak.
Oh, I was just going to say that you can see in those 80s albums like Empire Burlesque, he was clearly working with producers and saying, I want to make a modern record, modernize my sound. And this Fragments proves that. And again, I went back and reread the Oh Mercy, where Bono supposedly, with his case of Guinness, inspired Dylan to call up Daniel Lanois and hook up with him. But I think Court makes that great case. Lanois' own solo albums, Emmylou Harris, Wrecking Ball, just a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous album, that he's going to look to do something new, not modern, but new. And so, yeah, if we want a Let It Be Naked, whatever, for it's Empire Burlesque stripped down or something like that. But that's the sense where you get like he's working in the music industry and he's like, all right, I got to get a producer. I've got these songs. How do I modernize the sounds, and being completely disenchanted with that entire process. And it's just a remarkable testament to his artistry that he can't give it all up. He goes back and he's like, I found this producer that can get on my wavelength and can understand where I'm coming from. So I want to go back into the studio and go back again and again. I don't want to be in there with Tom Wilson for one night, record another side and get the hell out. I want to stay and really work with these songs. So it's just that vitality that Erin was talking about. It's remarkable.
But also, Rob, that point that Nina made about Lanois having the confidence to go head to head with Dylan, that maybe other producers wouldn't, and that helped the creative process to give us what we have in the final version.
I mean, they have been working obviously for some time. They knew each other at the degree.
Yeah.
I mean, there's these beautiful evocative moments with, Dylan with his little notebook, or maybe he's not even doing the notebook, but he's reading the lyrics to Lanois. That's a beautiful on the bumper of the car. But back to Jim's kind of question, I wonder too, is this and I'm not a Neverending Tour, however we call it, aficionado, but I'm wondering if these live tracks, as they enter into the set list, I wonder if this is what kind of, because you have those late 90s and early aughts concerts, which are really phenomenal. And I'm wondering if this is kind of loosening him up a little, not loosening him up, but maybe they're kind of addressing different things. Because, I think there's some stasis in those mid-90s shows. I mean, as good as they were, there's some stasis, and that maybe that blows up that. Because he starts bringing in those older tunes. He starts bringing in some of that stuff a little bit differently. I'm wondering if this is sort of the more of a segue period live version. I mean, I think we have some questions in terms of the bootleg series itself, of like, why those tracks, what are they trying to suggest here? It's not a whole show. There's different ways you can go about that. There's different ways you could approach that, but it's intriguing the way they've presented it.
I think of another live moment too, because it's always interesting to me that Dylan multiple times, in reflecting on those tempestuous studio recordings of Time Out of Mind, says that he felt the spirit of Buddy Holly, right? Hovering and inspiring the whole thing. And there's that give and take, right? Because on the one hand, we hear Buddy Holly and we think, well, that's old rock and roll. But Dylan remembers what it was like for that to be the freshest, newest, mind-blowing thing. He remembers what it feels like to be in the audience in the Duluth National Guard Armory, right? And hearing that. And so that one figure can be so old and so fresh and new and full of vitality is telling. I mean, that would be the presiding genius over those recording sessions, wouldn't it? But Buddy Holly.
And that's what he wanted from the Neverending Tour audiences. He wanted to keep playing the same places because he wanted newer audiences to come. He didn't want to be a revival tour. He wanted to have those that charge of people seeing him for the first time and the iconography of who he was gone, and just the songs themselves captivate you.
Well, it goes back to what Rob, you and I were talking about recently, this idea of the ever-expanding present, allowing for the past to sort of shape that, but you're in that moment right now. And he remembers specifically that moment, and that moment is going to, maybe he thinks of him in that way, or maybe he's constantly going back to that for some reason. I mean, we would all think that there's something really heavy there, but I think he's clearly mining something, and that's only going to continue when we get down the road from.
That's also why three of us are wearing Buddy Holly glasses for this roundtable.
It's the ever-expanding age of my eyes, but yes.
One of the things that strikes me about the live versions is the fact that, and I just looked this up, none of them are later than 2001. And, anyone who's attended Dylan concerts has heard other versions of some of these songs. And the one I always go back to in my mind and on listening to bootlegs is the 2019 version of Not Dark Yet, which in my mind stands up very well next to the 97 version. Any thoughts about that? Do you remember that version?
I remember seeing Ithaca, New York. I remember seeing it, and I've said this story to these folks many times, so I apologize, but he played Girl from the North Country as if he was saying goodbye to the song. It was this incredibly poignant, moving moment. And then this speaks to his profound ability as a performer. He turns away from the piano, grabs the microphone, and goes into this searing, the minor key, Not Dark Yet. He turns on a dime from this kind of this gentle way of performing the Girl from the North Country, and then the dark side of it we get, and it was so powerful.
I remember listening to that song in November 2016, and it was a dusk day in East Texas, the day after the election. That song speaks. That song speaks to everything you could ever go through. The other thing I was going to say is like his live show now, right? Very monochromatic in a beautiful way. But his live show then wasn't. His live show then was like, here's this song, here's an arrangement. Even what Rob was just saying, here's this shift. And now he's sort of like, well, now whatever he's doing currently, I don't really know, but it's like, here's something in brown for you. And I'm meaning this in the most beautiful, positive way I can. I don't mean it negatively at all. But I think that's interesting how he's adjusted the way he views these songs and arrangements.
And there was the echo effect that he had in 2019 when he played it live, which, though it's more pronounced than any of the echo effects you hear on the studio album Time Out of Mind, it feels of a piece that's like an extension, an amplification of that effect. And of course, Jim, you may have seen multiple shows on that tour, but I know that you and I actually attended the same concert and saw that version together at Northern Kentucky University in November of 2019, and that was the highlight of the show for me.
For the record, by the way, we weren't together. I had horrible seats, and when I got up to leave, I looked down the aisle. I was on the front row, like a mile away. But it was the highlight for me.
He was trying to get closer, but he was still a million miles from me.
So I want to wrap this up with a question about the future. All right. So I want to ask you, and Rob already gestured toward this. There have been some indications that we're nearing the end of the bootleg series, that there might not be too many more editions. We're at number 17. Maybe the Dylan camp wants to round it off at a nice 20 and and go from and not do any more after that. What do you hope will be in the next series, or what do you think will be in the next series? What do you want to hear?
I just want to add that that's a really fascinating conversation, though, right? Like, why? Because the reason why isn't content. The reason why is economics, and the reason why is, what does a box set look like today, and who's doing? I mean, there's a lot of really kind of interesting questions in that. I never got the feeling that they're thinking we've scraped the barrel and we don't have an interest anymore. I think it's more like, well, what does the bootleg series even look like? And I think there's been some weird sort of versions down the road, but I think there's as a group of a collection of recordings, it's a fascinating experiment. And I would hope that they don't end it, and I bet we all hope they don't end it, but maybe they'll shift it in some way and it's a different thing. But as a caveat, I think it's an interesting. The question of the series itself is interesting. I'll let other people speak first in terms of their wish list, but I think that is an interesting conversation.
Well, my wish list, of course, would be Love and Theft, because I love that album so much, and so anything that didn't get included is probably worth listening to as well. If there were Karma in the universe, the first disc would be a remix produced by Daniel Lanois, but I don't anticipate that will happen. But then, having said that, often the bootleg series I love are ones that blow my mind, because they take material that I was underwhelmed by originally and make me realize, oh, there was a whole lot more interesting going on here. So maybe Together Through Life, which is probably the weakest link, if I had to pick a weak link in Dylan's 21st century stuff, that would be the one where there's the most potential for movement for me. I think that if there's some really interesting material that didn't make the cut onto that album, I'd love to hear it, just so that I can appreciate what was going on at that time, maybe better than I currently do with that album.
Greeley, I was thinking the same thing about Together Through Life, that there's got to be something, not there has to be, but I want to see if there was anything else that would make it more interesting, for sure. So we're like-minded. I heard someone say the Supper Club tapes, that would be really wonderful to have those. So those would be my two. But yeah, Together Through Life was first on my list, for sure.
I think we go back to the idea of what we get out of it. I was most excited about Cutting Edge. I was most excited about Basement. But the ones I listened to, Another Self-Portrait is just 5 stars. Trouble No More, mind-blowing. Trouble No More shifted the needle. Supper Club would be great. I would say, what do people generally say? The 74 tour, do something with that.
Bird Session.
Street Legal, the Tom Petty stuff. I'll say this. Here's my two answers. One, I would like to do something larger with the Dead. There's got to be some great concert footage that is being cleaned up, and I would love to see something like that. And the Contrarian in me, and I'll just say it. Wouldn't you love to have the 5 discs of outtakes of the Christmas record, which I personally do love. I adore that record. If we're gonna have a wish list, let's get like the 5 discs there of different things and.
Dylan's Halloween songs, Dylan's Hanukkah songs, keep going down the list.
Guys, let me tell you, this is the record that's going to bring everybody together. 5 discs.
I don't hear a single, Court. I don't hear a single.
That is the short version. But if you've gone to the Dylan Center, they have really beautiful video footage of those Tom Petty shows. And I'm guessing that's probably being worked out at some point. I don't know how or what they look like, but that stuff would be really cool too.
Can I throw something in? Because I meant to work it in at some point. And as much as I love Fragments, I will say the one, maybe it wasn't, I couldn't call it a disappointment, but I had hoped that maybe there was a song I had never heard, that they would pull out and blow my mind. Because often the bootleg series will, and the Water is Wide. I mean, that was such a fantastic, and so I'm so glad that was out there. But when I went back to my old dusty copy of Still on the Road, Clinton Halen. He has in his covering all the songs that Bob Dylan is known to have written during, his career up to that point. He has an entry on a song called All I Ever Loved Is You, and which is almost the title of a Stanley Brothers song, but not quite. But he couldn't find any, official record of it. And this is quoting Halen. Talking of lost originals, another song title mentioned by the Criteria session musicians has singularly failed to appear, No Turning Back. This may have been turned into something else, as Doing All Right became Till I Fell in Love with You, or maybe not. So I don't know. Maybe Halen's just wrong, but he does have, that there are records with those song titles listed. All I Ever Loved Is You and No Turning Back. So I had kind of hoped that those would make it somehow onto Fragments, but they didn't for whatever reason. But maybe they'll be on the next bootleg series.
Any other predictions or hopes or dreams about the bootleg series?
I've already made my comment. I would like to see a more concerted curatorial attempt at the Neverending Tour, because that's such a huge part of Dylan's productivity over the past 25, 30 years now. And I from the economic standpoint, you can obviously see this is like an endless cash cow, where it's like, here's another curated, all of the songs from Time Out of Mind live in different versions. And, but I would like something really with that kind of a concerted curatorial, finding the best sound, but also the best performances, which is, that's a huge undertaking. But
and maybe that's what is, after the bootleg series ends, that's what the next undertaking is, because that is much bigger than anything the bootleg series has taken on. Erin, any thoughts?
I think I shared my thoughts. I did have thoughts on Not Dark Yet, but we moved past it.
No, please let us know. We don't have to be in order. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Graylee, maybe you and I can have a little repartee on this, but I felt that the first version of Not Dark Yet, I told you I was horrified by it, and so let me look at my notes. The one thing that I thought was interesting in particular was that there's the line where he says that just being in the same country as her is making me blue. I've got nothing left over from the love that we once knew. And he replaces that with, she wrote me a letter. She wrote it so kind. She put down in writing what was in her mind. And so it takes it from love, from pathos into her mind. And we joke that it's probably just a formatted Dear John letter, but he then does have something. There is something left over from the love. And it's probably this stale letter of just, Dear John. And I feel that I've already talked about I don't like the tempo. I miss the plotting of the percussion in it and the crashing of the cymbal. That it just makes me feel like this wave of sadness is coming over me. And so I felt like it's great to see what didn't work. I missed some of the really beautiful lyrics that he had in there, like the eyes of glass. And I did like Standing in the Shadows, even though it showed him in stasis. And I would love to know what you thought of that. But let me see, make sure to. I didn't like I thought that I was glad he dropped the lines. Her lips were so tender, her skin was so soft, because they just seemed, trite. And what he replaced them for was really lovely. And you pointed out, and I had this in my notes too, that I'm praying the master will guide me back, and how it leads us to every grain of sand. And he replaces that with I can't hear a murmur of a prayer. And it's like there's that sense of despair there. But I'm interested to know any thoughts in response to that.
Well, just so we're clear, I worship Not Dark Yet as released on the album. It is certainly the superior version. There's no doubt he picked the right version in terms of the tone to fit with its darker siblings on that album, but lyrically as well. I mean, those I references did get my thoughts turning. The line you mentioned there that appears in the album version, but not in the outtake. She wrote me a letter, and she wrote it so fine. She put down in writing what was on her mind. It's almost word for word taken from an old song called "Red River Shore" in one of the John Lomax song books. And so there's the bricolage thing, that he found a better line, and he didn't even have to write it himself, so he just stole it and put it in. But I'm still glad that this version of Not Dark Yet exists in the world and we have access to it, because it shows that versatility. It shows that a song that I never would have thought of in this kind of arrangement can have a certain charm. Not as good as the album version, not even close, but it kind of fits with the album, or with the song too, in that the central conceit, it's not dark yet, but it's getting there. Well, it's just lighter. It's really not as dark yet on this version, that the sun's setting, but the sun's still higher in the sky on this outtake than it will eventually sink down to when we get to the. So in a weird way, I mean, it's not dark yet, but it's getting there. Even that image is a sense of the passage of time and the erosion of the singer as the sun sinks lower.
I'm not sure I agree that I'm glad it exists, but he's even said that it's not about that ultimate despair, because he says it's not dark yet. It's that yet that is a qualifier. So I understand the up tempo, and I've really tried. I've listened to it quite a bit, and I've tried with it, but I keep going back to either version 2 or the one on the Lenoir album.
Well, he needs the London and Gay Paris line, which is one of my favorite sung verses that he's ever had.
And the way he delivers it, I've been to London. Oh, we don't do that. We don't imitate Bob. But though, you mentioned that, and it's always kind of out of place to me. I mean, I like the way he delivers it, but it's like, where does London and Gay Paris suddenly come in here? But that reminds me of one of the outtakes. Which song was it? Was it Dirt Road Blues, where he talks about walking the streets of Broadway and Hollywood, I think, and we're like, I thought you were on a dirt road. How do we get to New York and Hollywood all of a sudden? Yeah. So another one of those kind of non sequitur geographical references in this otherwise kind of unlocatable universe, except for trying to get to heaven, where we get Missouri and Baltimore.
I just want to say that on February 1st, there was a text exchange between me and Erin, and we were talking about all these other different things. And in the middle of this text exchange, she says, quote, "I have strong negative feelings about version 1 of Not Dark Yet."
That is true.
She was like, yes, these other things are important. We need to talk about these things, but I need to tell you, it is important for you to know that I, quote, have strong negative feelings about version 1 of Not Dark.
I'm consistent.
And to add to your point, Grayley, and you give voice to Erin and you give voice to yourself, please. But you suggest, I don't know if I completely buy this, but you suggest that London and Paris are ways to talk about rivers that aren't the Mississippi American river.
Right. And I was about to say that. So thank you for mentioning that. But that's what I thought. And in addition to all of the movement and the travel and whatnot that he talks about, I thought perhaps those were other or nods to other rivers, that because right after that he says that, he references the rivers that go to the sea. And so I thought that maybe there was a connection there.
And we don't know what Red River is either, right? Everyone just assumes it's the Oklahoma-Texas River, but it may not be.
There's apparently more than one Red River.
Yeah, it's not the most, specific sounding river.
Yeah.
Jim, I say that our next session will be all about Red River. Question mark.
Well, I want to wrap this up. This has been fantastic, as always. This is a great group. I love talking to you guys. And I always learn so much. Just listen to everybody go at the topics. And we will reconvene again if everyone is game for that. And we'll find another topic and we'll make short work of it. But thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dilettantes podcast. Be sure to subscribe to have the Dilettantes sent directly to your inbox. and share the Dilettantes on social media.